Let's take a look at the penalties. We're looking at this third block right here. We have two pieces of this really. The penalties that are generated automatically, and then the manual ones. Additionally, sort of the override stage time is sometimes called the penalty time. It's associated here because it's not actually a data recording piece. So if we look right at the map of penalties, these are the automatically generated timing penalties only. None of the manual penalties will show up in here. What we're trying to accomplish with this screen is to look at what do we have as far as the pieces that are generated, to look for things that might be set up incorrectly or for missing data. So if we see a whole control like this that has a penalty, maybe there's an incorrect piece of setup for TC3. So what we want to look at down here is a list, sort of the darker it is, the worse the penalty it is. Something that's dark red over 100 minutes. That is sort of something that is probably a problem. Someone's got some midnight times. So this is a piece that lets you look at that. The links obviously go right to each of the racers' cards, and we can look right at a particular timing control here. So that's the map used for verifying that our setup is working properly. The calculated penalties get updated each time that you run the full calculations. So you do have to do the calculate scores or quick for just one person. So let's take a look at, for a single entrant, we can remove a penalty. So here we have, for Mr. Antelope, 3 calculated penalties and one manual one. If we look at those, we will see here is his 1 manual penalty and all of his calculated penalties. Now, the piece to keep in mind about penalties is that every time you run a calculation, it does everything from scratch, and so it will recalculate and re-add those penalties. So we can't delete them. What we sort of do is we remove and prevent them from coming back by overriding them. So say this one right here, TC3A service in. We can either do one at a piece, one at a time, but usually we use this link right here, the remove, which does both of the listed championships. So if we remove this, and it will give us a, are you sure? So we do this, and we see now that we have in place for TC3A, we have this override. What the override means is that even when we run the calculations in the future to say, calculate all the penalties, it's going to hold this position and it's going to suppress any penalties from being done here. So this is certainly has 1 manual and 1 override. So we won't get any more penalties as long as this override stays here. Now we can remove the override, and in that case, in the future, penalties will show up. They aren't here right now. So in order for them to get here, we would have to do the calculate scores, and now that it's gone through all the calculations, then we will have that penalty is back here at TC3A. So we'll just leave one of these removed, just like that. So now there's 1 override, and we can see that if we're looking at the list for this particular team, there's 1 override listed there. So that shows us how to delete them. For a manual penalty, it's fairly straightforward. It's who do we want to add it to. Let's say Andy kept speeding, and it was on TC3 on the way to there. So we can give him another maybe a 5-minute penalty for speeding. And normally you leave all of these selected, and the software will figure out which championships is he actually in and give him penalties for both of those championships. So Andy is in the ARC and in day 1. He's not in day 2, but it'll take care of that automatically. So we can add the penalty, and now that's all set. So if we go back here and take a look at the penalties that he has, there are his 2 manually entered penalties. So for an entire control, we may have something where the clerk has said, just waive all the penalties, that have been calculated. So for an entire control, we can say give everyone an override so that no one gets penalties here. So we could say maybe the first stage something happened with the start, it was delayed. So we're just going to say, okay, at the first stage, no penalties. So we can do that. Now we have everything overridden. And then if we go look here at clear all overrides, we will see that there are 10 overrides sitting here. Now there's only 4 racers, but the overrides are listed on per championship. So it's for all the championships that they're in. So to clear all these out, we can delete them. And then also here we can see here are the 2 overrides for that TC3A. So we can remove them here. So once this is in, we can prevent anyone from getting penalties at that control. Now if you have a situation where someone has said we're just waiving all penalties at a control, the other way that you could really do it too is down here under the controls on the type. We could just set that type to ignored down here, our very last piece. So this arrival is set to ignored currently. Normally it would start out as pending. So sometimes it's faster just to set it to ignored, and that lets you do ultimately the same thing. No penalties at that control. So there are 2 workflows that you can use to accomplish the same result. So that covers handling the entire field. Now lastly, we have the override stage times. So remember, everything within this tool, time data entry, is based on time of day. So if you want to override a stage score, what you should not do is make up a fake time of day that they finished, because that messes up, the other investigation tools we have to use later. So we have an override stage time that looks at all of the times that are in here. So this will show you, here's the time that they actually got. Now let's say on stage 1, car 12, they stopped to help someone, and they asked for some time back, and the clerk gave them 30 seconds back. So you could say, I'm going to override this time and put in an 8:03, 8 minutes and 3 seconds. So it will use this override time when it does its further calculations, and that 8:03 is what will show up here in the detailed overall. They'll have 8:03 right there. So for that, this is the tool that you would use to do a force majeure situation where half the field needed to have a time set for them. And if you choose the wrong person, you can if you check that box, then it'll disappear and go back to their stock time. So that is the force majeure tool. And that covers the penalty box.